Philippine Navy said the world's largest Coast Guard ship, which belongs to China, sailed deep into the country's exclusive economic zone, EEZ, in the West Philippine Sea on Friday in what a U.S. maritime security expert said was a move to normalize Chinese presence and jurisdiction in these waters. Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad, the Navy spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, said the 165-meter China Coast Guard ship with bow number 5901, nicknamed the Monster, was seen 50 nautical miles off Scarborough Shoal, well within the country's 200 nautical miles EEZ. Without elaborating, he said the action would be taken most likely by the Philippine Coast Guard since it was a Chinese Coast Guard vessel that was involved. Over the past 24 hours, the world's largest Coast Guard ship, the 165-meter China Coast Guard 5901, together with the 102-meter China Coast Guard 5203, conducted a brief intrusive patrol into the Philippines' exclusive economic zone west of Scarborough Shoal. As the Southeast Asian country faces growing Chinese pressure in the South China Sea, the Philippines has agreed to buy 5 Coast Guard patrol ships from Japan in a deal worth more than 23.8 billion pesos, and the ships will be delivered in 2027. Japan will loan the Philippines 64.3 billion yen, around $413 million, to buy the 597-meter multi-role response vessels, and Japan will pay for the development of the required support facilities. This will support the PCG in improving its capabilities for maritime operations, particularly in addressing transnational crimes and the aggressive China stint in the West Philippine Sea. These ships are the same size as the biggest one currently in the Philippine Coast Guard fleet. The Philippine Coast Guard currently has 2 97-meter patrol vessels, as part of a fleet seen as insufficient for patrolling waters around the vast archipelago nation. In recent months, its vessels have been involved in several collisions with Chinese Coast Guard ships around disputed reefs in the South China Sea, which Beijing claims almost entirely. Philippine Coast Guard boats have also been fired on with water cannons by the China Coast Guard, with the latest incident happening on April 30th near the China-controlled Scarborough Shoal. The triangular chain of reefs and rocks that make up Scarborough Shoal lies 240 kilometers or 150 miles west of the Philippines' main island of Luzon and nearly 900 kilometers from Hainan, the nearest major Chinese landmass. Ray Powell, the head of Project Mayushu, directing to South China Sea at the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University, said in a post on X on Friday that the CCG's monster ship was accompanied by a smaller China Coast Guard vessel. In a chart accompanying his post, the 2 ships sailed from a northeastern direction, crossing the western boundary of the Philippines' EEZ toward Panatag Shoal, and later made a U-turn before reaching it. China, according to Powell, conducts intrusive patrols deep within the exclusive economic zones of neighboring countries to establish a continuous presence and gradually normalize Chinese jurisdiction over areas granted to its neighbors under international law. The appearance of China's largest Coast Guard ship followed last week's civilian-led convoy of 4 fishing boats that headed to Panatag, also known as Bajo de Masinloc, about 246 kilometers west of Zambales, to deliver food supplies and fuel to Filipinos fishing in their traditional fishing ground and assert Philippines' sovereign rights over its EEZ. The convoy turned back about 93 kilometers away from Panatag after a 5th fishing boat had breached the 25 nautical miles to 35 nautical miles perimeter that the Chinese Coast Guard had set around the shoal as a no-entry zone for Filipino fishermen. Another CCG ship also appeared at the same distance, 93 kilometers, east of the shoal, the closest point to Panatag where the convoy decided to turn around. The monster's appearance also comes ahead of the June 15 implementation of a new Chinese regulation that allows its Coast Guard to arrest foreigners and foreign vessels that cross its borders illegally and detain them without trial for up to 60 days. Jay Batangbakal, head of the Institute of Maritime Affairs and the Law of the Sea of the UP College of Law, said China's new regulations were quite vague, and the arrest and detention of Filipinos within the country's EEZ would be illegal and invalid. China Coast Guard vessels regularly and visibly conduct intrusive patrols, deep within the exclusive economic zones of neighboring countries, an activity meant to establish a continuous presence, and gradually normalize Chinese jurisdiction over areas granted to its neighbors under international law. Intrusive patrolling describes how the China Coast Guard routinely patrols within the exclusive economic zones of other states. These patrols are a key component of China's strategy to reinforce its expansive maritime claims in disputed waters. By doing so, China aims to establish a continuous presence and gradually normalize its maritime activities in these areas. These patrols demonstrate Beijing's resolve to create de facto jurisdiction over areas clearly granted to other nations under the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. China signed UN Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1996, but claims it is subordinate to the PRC's historic rights over the South China Sea. The persistent presence of China Coast Guard vessels can intimidate other claimant states and discourage them from challenging China's maritime assertions. Through such patrolling activities, China effectively employs a strategy of incremental encroachment to strengthen its territorial claims in the South China Sea, gradually altering the status quo in its favor. As the Southeast Asian country faces growing Chinese pressure in the South China Sea, the Philippines has agreed to buy 5 Coast Guard patrol ships from Japan in a deal worth more than 23.8 billion pesos, and Japan will pay for the development of the required support facilities. The signing was witnessed by officials from the Department of Finance, the Department of Transportation and the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Tokyo is a top provider of overseas development assistance to the Philippines. Japan invaded and occupied the Philippines during World War II, but the two countries have since grown closer due to trade and investment, and more recently, to counter China's assertiveness in the region. As part of efforts to deepen their security cooperation, Manila and Tokyo are negotiating a defense pact that would allow the countries to deploy troops on each other's territory. Leaders of Japan and the Philippines, both longtime allies of the United States, were in Washington last month for a trilateral summit with U.S. President Joe Biden. Tensions over the South China Sea, combined with saber-rattling over China's claims to the self-governing island of Taiwan, have prompted Biden to boost alliances in the region. Beijing claims most of the strategic waterway of the South China Sea, brushing off rival claims from other countries, including the Philippines, and an international ruling that its assertion has no legal basis. Meanwhile, the Philippine Air Force has received 2 Turkish T-129 ATAK helicopters. The aircraft were delivered at the 15th Strike Wing headquarters in Sangley Point in Cavite. The Philippines ordered 6 T-129 units under a $269 million government-to-government contract with Turkey, signed in July 2020. The acquisition program is part of the Horizon 2 phase of the Philippines' military modernization plan. According to reports, the latest arrivals are the 5th and 6th helicopters of that deal. The T-129 ATAK aircraft is a twin-engine attack helicopter designed for armed reconnaissance in hot and high environments and day and night missions. This also marks attack helicopters becoming a symbol of the Turkish defense industry and military exports after carving a niche in combat UAVs like the TB2 Bayraktar and the Angkinchi drones. The acquisition of the T-129 attack helicopters was part of the priority projects under Horizon 2 of the AFP modernization program. The T-129s are the 5th and 6th T-129 attack helicopters acquired through negotiated government-to-government procurement with Turkey. These dedicated attack helicopters are expected to enhance the combat operational capability of Philippine Air Force and address the capability gap identified in urban warfare. In the face of escalating maritime tension with Beijing in the South China Sea, the Philippine Navy has secured the lion's share of the recently approved $35 billion Armed Forces of the Philippines modernization budget, signaling a notable recalibration in defense allocations. The budget is slated to finance a range of acquisitions outlined in an extensive wish list submitted by the AFP to the President. Dubbed Horizon 3, this revised phase seeks to not only obtain new equipment but also remove inefficiencies, streamlining the procurement process and developing a better defense strategy. Alongside Horizon 3, the new comprehensive archipelago defense concept put forward by Philippine defense officials brings an increased emphasis on naval and air forces for the defense of the country. In this strategy, the traditionally internally focused AFP is envisioned operating offshore in its exclusive economic zone and beyond. The Philippine Navy's missions include patrols from the EEZ to the internal waterways of the 7,641 island country. Moreover, with an external threat from China, the force is looking to acquire high-end anti-air and submarine warfare capabilities. In addition, the Philippine Coast Guard, in extent to Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, Modernization and Recapitalization Program, can help free up the Philippine Navy to focus more on conventional warfighting and other military missions than just patrolling and enforcing the country's exclusive economic zone. Equipped with Japanese and French patrol vessels, the Philippine Coast Guard has been frequently deployed to the South China Sea to protect Philippine fishermen, ward off foreign vessels and escort Philippine Navy resupply missions to Second Thomas Shoal. The Philippine Coast Guard is set to procure a large number of ocean-going patrol ships in an upcoming Modernization Act. Japan pledged to fund 7 patrol ships, on top of the existing 12 previously handed over, following a diplomatic visit to Manila in November. Philippine senators have also eyed Austal's shipyard in Cebu to build 3 offshore patrol vessels. While the list of assets is not yet public, Manila has been eyeing the procurement of 2 to 3 attack submarines from either France or South Korea and more BrahMos supersonic anti-ship missiles from India for its army. South Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries also expects further warships orders from the Philippine Navy. Since 2012, Manila has ordered 2 frigates, 2 corvettes and 6 offshore patrol vessels from the Korean shipbuilder. Other major procurements include 4 landing platform docks from PT PAL Indonesia, which are the largest ships in the Philippine Navy at 7,200 tons. In addition, the Philippines is planned to acquire multi-role fighter jet from Sweden. While the government has not identified the final choice for the fighter jet, the Swedish firm Saab's JAS 39 Gripen was reportedly among the top choice. In addition to AFP assets, donations from the U.S. include 3 Hamilton-class cutters and 3 Cyclone patrol ships. These patrol vessels frequently patrol the South China Sea and waters around Mindanao. An additional 4 patrol vessels, 2 Protector and 2 Island-class patrol boats, were eyed for transfer to the Philippines pending congressional notification requirements, according to a White House press release last year. The United States has transferred to its close ally, the Philippines, a second-hand C-130 transport plane to boost the country's heavy lift capability. The transport plane was acquired by the Philippines through a State Department program. It was the second C-130 plane to be given to the Philippines. The new addition will bolster the Philippine Air Force's cargo airlift fleet and support humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations, and various military missions. Air Force now has 5 operational C-130 planes. The C-130 aircraft are the military's workhorses, transporting troops, military supplies, and equipment. In October last year, the Philippines would acquire 3 brand new C-130 aircraft for 22.2 billion pesos from Lockheed Martin, an American aerospace, arms defense, information security, and technology corporation. The 3 aircraft are due to be delivered in batches, the first one in July 2026, the second in October 2026, and the third in January 2027. Amid increasing regional tensions, particularly in the West Philippine Sea and the Luzon Strait, Manila is modernizing its military capabilities through the revised Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program. Many of the new assets being procured are related to the Armed Forces of the Philippines' shift to territorial defense operations, which aims to orient Philippine forces toward more conventional and higher-end threats. Several procurements made by Manila to address this new focus include Israeli long-range patrol aircraft and Indian BrahMos supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles. The long-standing territorial disputes between the two countries have triggered confrontations between their Coast Guard ships, with fears of a potential Chinese invasion of the Second Thomas Shoal looming large over Manila. Chinese vessels regularly attempt to prevent Filipino vessels from replenishing their troops aboard the Sierra Madre warship, which was deliberately run aground several years ago and functions as a temporary Filipino outpost at the disputed shoal. In Southeast Asia, the situation in the Philippines, however, is unique. Among the Southeast Asian nation, the Philippines is not only a full-fledged U.S. Defense Treaty ally, but it is also increasingly contributing to an emerging integrated deterrence strategy against China. Marcos Jr.'s decision to fortify bilateral defense cooperation with the U.S., barely a month after a state visit to Beijing, was doubly surprising. For starters, it ran counter to his initial push for a new golden era of bilateral relations with China and his longtime emphasis on diplomacy and balanced relations with superpowers. But even more surprising has been his decision to expand the parameters of the EDCA with a northern orientation toward Taiwan rather than a western one towards the South China Sea, where Manila and Beijing are at heated loggerheads over contested territories and features. The bulk of the new bases under the expanded EDCA are located in northernmost Philippine provinces, namely Cagayan and Isabela, which are notably distant from the South China Sea theater. Crucially, the two allies have also expanded joint exercises with a growing focus on the Philippines' northern shores. Philippine authorities maintain that any cooperation with the Pentagon is primarily geared toward economic and civilian purposes.